Welcome to Humanist Views, a program where we look at current issues from a humanist point of view. I'm Scott Lohman. On tonight's program, we're going to take a look at another side of one of the world's fairly major religions and see how it adapts as we move into modern times, take a look at some of its traditions, as well as where some people get it and how it relates to humanism. So we're going to take a look at Buddhism, and my guest tonight is Ted Meisner.
Evening.
And Ted is a secular Buddhist. So we're going to talk about how do you get there and what is Buddhism? And let's just do a quick 101 on that. So tell me first a little brief about yourself. How did you get interested in it?
My background started at the Minnesota Zen Meditation Center here in Lake Calhoun. I got into a Buddhist practice from the martial arts.
Okay.
And that led towards an idea that, hey, meditation is very helpful for concentration. That will help in what you're doing. So I checked out the Zen Center, and that was something of a culture shock.
I'm sure.
It's a little bit different for a middle-aged white guy like myself to walk in, and the door is opened by a guy in robes who's bald.
There you go.
Not always so used to that, but you
No.
get over these cultural hurdles and find that the practice itself and what the teachings of Buddhism are really quite sensible and fit very well with a contemporary Western society.
Yeah, that's very cool, because most people just think of the bright orange robes and the Dalai Lama and that, but they don't understand that there are approaches that are not that formal.
Yeah, and we just covered all three of the major branches of Buddhism by
one quick sentence.
With those colors. We've got the traditional Theravada, which is the old style religion of Buddhism, primarily based in Sri Lanka in India.
Okay.
And then you have the Mahayana branches of Zen, which would tend to be the darker robes. We would see those most commonly here.
Okay.
And the Tibetan practice, the Vajrayana, is the Dalai Lama's branch. And then what we see a little bit more and more is as it adapts towards our contemporary Western culture, as all faith traditions and ideas do, they adapt to the environment that they're in.
Okay.
We're seeing the same thing in Buddhism that we see with Christianity and Judaism and other faith traditions.
So that's sort of spreading out rather than coming in with, we always do it this way, starting to go, we can grab from here and adapt to that. So it's nice to see that humans do that, because we do that with everything.
Yes, we do.
So that makes you then a secular. So what traditions do you pull from regular Buddhism? Well,
one of the advantages of secular Buddhism and what we see as a very distinguishing characteristic, if you will, about secular Buddhism, which it's an oxymoron. You have secularism, but it's a religion. How does that work?
Yes.
Well, Buddhism itself is always fraught with the question, is this a religion or is it a philosophy? Because you guys have this practice and you meditate and it seems to be about the mind and you don't really worship a god, so what's up with that? Does that fit into a religion? Say, well, yes, it is a religion. There's still a monastic tradition. There are still rituals and rites and observances and things like that. So I would say, yes, it does fit into that.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean that you're not allowed to have any ideological components or philosophical components or practice components to it. To me, that was what was initially appealing about Buddhism. And then as you and I know from years back, I'm very much a secularist. I'm active in both the skeptical and the atheist community. So having that background of questioning with confidence, so why do we do this, was nothing new to me, but I found that the questions led to very good answers or things that were very easily set aside because they didn't impact how I did the actual practice itself. So as I look at the earliest Buddhism, the Theravada, which is the oldest texts we have, those basic teachings go down to how we train our minds. In a nutshell is how that works, and that's perfectly applicable to today's culture.
Definitely, because learning how to use your mind, use different aspects, we're finding that there is something to meditation and that sort of stuff that does help us as human beings. And that's something we kind of moved away from in the secular community and discovered, some of these things we think are just a little on the can be helpful.
Yeah, we're very, particularly in the skeptic community, I'm glad you brought that up, we're very, we term things as woo, and we push them away. We don't
Yes.
set them aside. We aggressively push them
Oh,
away
yeah.
in some cases. And what we're finding is there are a large number of neuroscientists who are doing MRI scans of the brain to see, well, what's the difference between people who have no experience meditating and 8 weeks of meditation? And they're doing controlled studies where they do these images of the brain before and after, and they do as many people as they can. Of
Yep.
course, it's very expensive to do MRIs, so you don't have a lot of those.
Definitely, or the active ones while they're in the middle
While
of
they're
this.
in the middle of it. And what we're seeing, some of the folks that I have interviewed who are neurologists who have been in these and led these studies, have shown a couple of different things. First, that it's not just brain plasticity. We do see that, of course, and there are physiological changes in the brain. There's thickening of different regions of the brain before
Okay.
and after.
Cool.
Of a period of time of meditation. We see that there are different parts of the brain that light up and different kinds of waves that they give off
Okay.
after an experience with meditation, not just one sitting, but after they've been doing it for a couple of months, there's a marked difference that we can see. So having the backup of physiologically, there is something going on with the meditative practice itself lends credence to why there are so many of us who are very secular who nonetheless meditate. And some of us just meditate, and that's enough. And there are those of us who also look at, well, what's the early teaching? Is there a little more to that is maybe more beneficial in the rest of my life? And that's what I have found to be so.
That's very cool because they've done some studies on looking at different aspects of prayer versus meditation and found that when some get into that really deep contemplative, they manage to shut off the part of your brain that says, I'm sitting on a chair in front of a desk in this place, and that Buddhist meditation can get people there, and that certain types of prayer can get you there. And that's where people start experiencing those really big things because the old brain's going, oh, I'm no longer connected to what part of reality I'm at. So,
Yeah. And we get into, I think, murkier waters when we've historically said as meditators, hey, I had this experience, this stuff happened, I wasn't hearing things, that my thoughts were very muted, and I was in this lovely place, and there was light and everything. Well, we as skeptics would typically say, yeah, okay, that's just in your head. Why, yes, it is, quite literally, and now we have brain scans to show this is something that is happening in our brains, and that doesn't invalidate that there's an experience there, and that can be positively beneficial. And it is something biological, perfectly natural, and that there's nothing in conflict with having a very naturalistic practice.
Exactly, and it does help your brain in that, but at least we have an experience. We just know that you're just playing with the brain circuitry and doing some really interesting things with it.
Yeah, and why not? In the same way that we exercise our bodies, this is exercising the brain and the mind. Bear in mind those being two somewhat different concepts.
Exactly.
Religions don't have any rules against doing jumping jacks for exercising the body. I don't really know why they would have any rules against exercising the mind.
Yep, unless they keep thinking the way, because when they tell about, ooh, that's how you let demons in that, then that's just like,
Actually,
oh, please.
That did occur. I do interfaith panel discussions, and I found some months after one of them that I had done that there is a local Christian broadcast that was not at all happy that I participated in this comparison between Buddhist meditation and Christian meditation, and is there a common ground? And of course, well, are you focusing your mind in one spot? Then, well, yes, there we have a common ground.
Exactly.
We may diverge on our explanations of what's happening, but that doesn't mean that there isn't something meaningful and helpful to us. This, of course, was met not so well with the person who ran that radio show. Said, "Oh, we can't," and there was a commenter on that website saying, "Oh, but that's where Satan comes in, is when we empty the mind." I'm like, well, I understand that's your concern. What experience do you have with meditation? What do you know about it? And we did have a very nice dialogue for a little while, but it got to a point of they couldn't really answer, because the answer was, well, I don't have any experience. I really don't know what I'm talking about, and you do, so I'm just going to stop now.
Yeah, it's always interesting when you can get to the point where you can nail them down on that, and it's like, okay, they'll retreat.
Yeah.
So what are some of the principles that go back to basic Buddhism? We can look at, compare and contrast that with the basics of humanism.
Well, as I understand it, and you and I have chatted about this several times, that humanism has the ideas of, and this is what I like from the Humanist Manifesto, the third version, is that it's really about taking humanity forward.
Yeah.
That the be excellent to each other, I'm Ted so I can say that, really has very fruitful benefits to doing that. One reason I identify more as a secular Buddhist than a secular humanist is, although also a secular humanist, I like the practice component. How do I train my mind in order to do those things? So if we look at the ideas behind Buddhism, it's really about, as the Buddha is reported to have said, really I just teach one thing, the extinguishing of suffering.
Okay.
Now, the way they get about that is through, and this will be a gross nutshell version, is training the mind through an understanding and practice, which we call the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, which is really grandiose ways and religious ways of saying we train the mind in terms of our ethical behavior, our understanding of cause and effect, of behavior with each other, that if I do something to you, there's going to be something that occurs from that, not in a magical cosmic bank account sense, but in you're a human being and you will react. And in terms of mental development, how we practice our ability to make better decisions and feel better about what we're doing and not grasp onto our misconceptions about what we think is going on. All of us have these ideas about what we are, and we own the road, for example, and if someone cuts us off, that's our justification to get mad. They shouldn't have done that. This is a practice to help us not see things in that very narrow and often very incorrect way. It's not our road, and they're rushing off to the hospital because she's about to give birth, so chill.
Adjusting your perspective.
Adjusting your perspective. So with secular humanism, this ties in quite well to that. And
very much, because that's almost the basics for critical thinking and rational analysis in there, except it's coming at it from a sort of a pre-scientific approach, but bringing in aspects that show up later as part of the scientific process.
Yes, exactly. And the scientific method, the Dalai Lama has been quoted as saying in his book, The Universe in a Single Atom, that if science and Buddhism are in conflict on some point, science is correct and Buddhism must change. Well, yes, that's so, because the evidence is there to support one of those. And I'd say that's one of the key differences with secular practice versus traditional practice, and not to disparage traditional practice, but secular practice is not dependent on assertions that aren't in evidence. So things like rebirth, for example, a secular person might ask for more evidence of a literal rebirth and may look to the early texts when they talk about rebirth as, well, we could view this as talking about mind states, that one moment to the next is a helpful way to look at this.
Sure.
It helps us change our minds and broaden that moment so that we can make better decisions about what we're doing moment by moment.
So it helps you be aware of basically the moments and what's going on in those. Because one of the things from Humanist Manifesto, which is this great
conveniently right there. Yeah.
Conveniently right here. Knowledge of the world is derived by observation, experimentation, and rational analysis.
Yes.
That covers what you're teaching your mind to do and understand where you see things and where maybe you need a little more perspective to understand how to analyze the information you get.
Yeah, meditation is about seeing things as they are, as much as we are able to within our own, nod to Max Singer's ego tunnel, within our own minds, as much as we are able to do so. And the meditative process, that particular part of the Eightfold Path, is about watching very closely, moment by moment, what's happening in our mind? What's happening in our bodies? When we feel an ache, does that change our mood? What thought comes up from that? And maybe not following that or identifying with that as, I have to do this now because I'm angry, I must now honk my horn on the person who's got, maybe not, not so much.
Yeah, pull back and relax a little bit. So, okay, so those, shows that it started as more of a down-to-earth sort of thing and may have picked up a few other things along the way.
2,500 years, you're going to pick up a few things.
You're going to pick up a few things, exactly. So, so the other traditions, though, then have more, other aspects?
There are, for example, Tibetan Buddhism has many of the qualities of the cultural Bon tradition that was already there. So you'll see much more inclusion of what, from the outset, as a Westerner, in our very narrow focus, granted, as local deities. And they have been converted into Buddhist deities, but they're still supernatural beings, and they're still invisible creatures, and you still do rituals to ask for their beneficence and luck and things like that.
Okay.
Zen tradition, culturally, being a product more of Japan, has that a particular cultural flavor of the way the Japanese look at things. So there's much more precision in, for example, the very formal oryoki meals on retreat, where your emotion is very mindfully mapped out for you. And that's intended to help you so that you don't get distracted and go in the wrong direction. Our Western culture and secular practice is a product of who we are. So where this is going to go is anybody's guess, but it's evolving, as you said.
Yeah, and that's what makes it, sort of compatible with humanism and rationalism, is that it's picking up, it's sort of mixing with the good parts that we've got, as opposed to the scarier or more supernatural, less rational parts. So it can be a good mix for people to do that.
Very much so. Yeah.
So you're not running into conflict of the rational part of your brain, and especially the science part, which is, as Carl Sagan said, it's our candle on the world, where we just take this candle, and as people have said, you can get through a 10-mile tunnel just within the light of a candle, but that doesn't mean you catch all of the bits on the way, but you will understand where you're going and somewhat of where you've been.
Yeah, Carl and his Demon Haunted World, and I love the cover to that particular edition.
Yeah, so that helps us with understanding that. So, and then also Buddhism is very connected to nature as well.
It can be. In various traditions, you'll see that idea of an interconnectedness. And some take that as an interconnectedness of the cosmic consciousness, kind of the Deepak Chopra way of looking at things, which I don't. Many of us do, many of us don't. But there's always an interdependence, and we see that in the principle of dependent origination, is what it's called. And basically that's a cause and effect from this leads to that, leads to that, leads to that. And it's about just the experience of existence.
Okay.
And it can be viewed as this is literal rebirth, or this could be viewed as a moment by moment mind states, is what this can also refer to. So nature is very much a part of it. One thing I did want to get back to is, to make sure that we covered this, is Sam Harris recently, just a month or so ago, had posted on his blog an article about meditation.
Okay.
So when we talk about, yes, this is fairly compatible with secular humanism and with these contemporary ideals that we have as secularists, even Sam Harris is posting about the benefits of meditation and has a background in meditation.
He studied neuroscience as well.
And neuroscience as well. So there is a great compatibility and synchronicity there.
Yeah, and so just how does one get started with, what are just some of the, if somebody was to just think, well, let's think about how do I get started just thinking about trying meditation?
Trying meditation?
Yep.
One of the things I would recommend you do is take a look in your local area. See if there's a meetup group that does meditation, or if there's a local center that does some kind of basic introduction to meditation.
Okay.
It's very helpful to have someone who's been doing it for a few years give you the basic guidelines.
Okay.
Because whether you're very religious or very secular, those beginning steps of, okay, sit and be careful of your posture and just quiet the mind and put your mind on the breath, and it's going to wander, and that's okay. Just gently bring it back. That will be very similar no matter where you go.
Okay, so just learning those basic setup skills is what they help with.
Yes, and there are a number of books that I have on the website in the resources section, which are also things you can get and try it on your own. Give it 10 minutes. See what it's like. That's also probably the hardest 10 minutes of meditation you would ever do, because it's the first time typically we look at how noisy it is in here and what's going on.
Yeah, people will notice that, because some nights when you've like made that midnight trip down to the bathroom and coming back, and then the brain starts thinking of things. It's like, okay, could you shut off so I could go back to sleep? And trying to get re-distracted on that. So I can see the appeal to that. And also we'll see that in another thing that you and I share an interest is we'll see that science fiction stories will steal from that. And if we look at, say, how Vulcans were set up in Star Trek, we can see that they stole quite a bit from Buddhism on their meditation and how they've set that up.
Yeah, and I'd say one of the deepest principles that the Vulcan culture adopted, thank you, Gene Roddenberry, was this idea of passion, that passion can be problematic. Now, where that kind of falls short, particularly with us being humans at our modern culture, is that the idea in Buddhism of not being so attached and letting go, it doesn't mean you don't love your kids.
Exactly.
Of course you love your kids. It means you don't smother your kids.
Exactly.
It means keeping things in perspective with that mindful awareness of the big picture of cause and effect. Is what I am doing, and because you've been watching your mind work, you have a bit more practice of seeing, my wanting my kid to go to college here is more about me wanting the nearby than what's best for them, and I need to make a better choice for them.
Yeah, so it allows you to refocus on the decisions you need to make, help you sort of shift back and not be, well, it'd be nice if you go to this college, but I know that one across the country has that exact room, but this one's closer.
Yeah, and that's one of the difficulties with meditation is it can be very hard, because sometimes you sit and you may do your half hour of meditation and you reach a nice blissful state. It's like, oh, that's really nice, and things are calm and thoughts are coming in ways that are the manner in which you would like to have them. Other times, you're seeing things about yourself that are not so comfortable. So it can also be very challenging, but there's no such thing as a bad sitting. Even if your mind is wandering constantly the whole time, that's okay. It's practice. Sometimes when you're training for a marathon, it's not always smooth sailing, flat ground with the wind at your back. Sometimes you've got some hills and bumps to go through.
Definitely. So it's nice to know that that's got a learning curve on it, and
Absolutely.
that as all things human, you've got your good days and you got your bad days.
Yep.
And I also like the fact that Buddhism matches up with, the concept of ethical values derived from human need and interest. Buddhists have tested that through time as well.
Yeah, and that's where when I talk about the Eightfold Path, there are really three main components to that. One is just understanding of things working, cause and effect, for example. Another is, as we were talking about before, the meditation component and what thoughts come up and what we do with them. But the other part, morality, or ethical behavior is what I prefer to call it, because the concept of morality has some baggage that we may not always be so fond of, is speech. The way we communicate would be one way of saying that. Actions, what do we do to and with each other? And livelihood in our professions. What is it that we're doing that is part of the overall community? So when we look at this as an overall practice of this Eightfold Path, so for right speech, lying and divisive speech and harsh speech and things that aren't helpful, it's nice having that quick reference of what this means, and then during meditation, examining those more deeply, you find there are many, many layers to that. And it is, we call it a practice because it's not a perfect, it's a practice, and you need to keep doing it. And people who are good at it, they have a natural talent for picking up these things, but also have many years of meditative practice. Often you can tell there is a fundamental change, and a lot of people who go on long retreats come back and their friends and family like, you've really made a big page has been turned for you.
Yeah, so that's one thing that I've always, admired about Buddhism from even my humanist point of view is that it does center people on themselves, and it's not there's going to be information beamed into me, from the sort of the Christian point of view, but in Buddhism, you're examining yourself from the inside to get those understandings.
Only in this fathom-long body is the term. It's nothing external to it. There's nothing supernatural to it. And we see, and happily with these studies, we're seeing that more and more and more. And where I sometimes get into discussions online with people who are very traditional and say, oh, you're ruining Buddhism with this secular approach, this is bad. I said, well, they didn't have MRIs 2,500 years ago. They might not have been that technology might not have been as well developed, otherwise
Yep.
might have been just fine. We got to understand that what we have and what we're looking at is people from thousands of years ago trying to find understanding about what they were experiencing and the way they were seeing the world work. Take that into context.
Yeah, especially since, the one thing is we're a communal animal, we're a social animal, but we also, all our thoughts are self-contained in this thing. And we've seen is when people get, one of their aspects of communication gets damaged, it affects them.
Yeah.
It also affects your connections with others. So having a place where you can examine that on the inside and then manifest or, go those with the behaviors is got a helpful approach to it.
Very much so. And the idea that really it all comes from the mind. When I say things, it may seem very reflexive, but it isn't. This is really something coming from my head. And a greater awareness of this helps me make sure that I'm speaking, acting, interacting in a more beneficial fashion.
So I definitely can see the appeal on that part of it. So we've got just a couple of seconds left. So what would you suggest people think about if they want to try a look at Buddhism?
If they want to take a look at it, go online, find a local place, go to an introduction to meditation. Try that. You can also go to a number of places online and check out a few books. Go to the library, see what they have, read a little bit about it. On the website for the Secular Buddhist, I do have a resources page that will have really good books that'll get you going.
Excellent, and we always like recommending books. That's one of our favorite activities on these shows. So thank you, Ted. Really appreciate your time. And for more information on this, the Humanists of Minnesota, you can find information on our website. So go to humanistsofmn.org. We'd also like to hear what you think of this program. You can communicate through us through our website, give us a phone call, or send us one of those old-fashioned paper things in an envelope. We'd like to hear from you what you think of this program and topics you'd like to see us cover in future programs. Thank you for joining me on this edition of Humanist Views. I'm Scott Lohman. Good night.